brevity is hard. Taking the whole world of knowledge on a subject and condensing it down into something that is practical and easy to consume, that's actually a really hard skill. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Practical Learning Professional. My name is Matt Jertson, founder and chief learning officer of Better Everyday Studios. I'm really excited you decided to come back for another episode, and today I want to talk about the topic of course length. This comes up a lot when I'm talking to clients. They talk about how long it takes for their current learning solution. How long is what we're going to deliver to them going to be? I know when I was working at SpaceX, this was always a hot topic because everyone was so busy, and it was just like, why can't it be shorter? Why does it need to be this long? And then you hear things like micro learning, where everything, all content in the world seems to be getting shorter and shorter. And there's good things to that, but there's also bad things to that. Some companies, some organizations do appreciate more content. So what's the right answer? How should we think about this? And so there's four things that I want to talk about today in regards to course length. First, I want to talk about off-the-shelf content and how you should be thinking about course length with off-the-shelf content. Then we'll dive specifically into micro-learning, talk about learning outcomes, and then finally talk about these larger kind of cornerstone courses, the half-day, the day-long kinds of things. How does all that fit into this conversation? Okay, so let's get started with off-the-shelf content. Obviously, there's solutions out there like Coursera or LinkedIn Learning where their whole sell is the idea that they have a lot of content. And even if you're not purchasing an entire library and you're just, purchasing single courses off the shelf, it can be enticing to say, well, look, if I'm paying this much money, then I want to get more for it. But when it comes to learning, this is definitely one of those situations, kind of like the quote out there, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. Brevity is hard. Taking the whole world of knowledge on a subject and condensing it down into something that is practical and easy to consume, that's actually a really hard skill. And so not in all cases, but at least in some cases, you should be looking at what is the quality of the content, not just the quantity of the content. But that's hard, right? I get it. When you're trying to evaluate courses, it's easier to say, oh, it's 4 hours and this is how much we're paying for that 4 hours. You really need to move beyond that metric. That's a metric that's just going to take you in the wrong direction. And so whether it is an entire course, an entire library, or just individual courses, you really need to take the idea of what is the length of the content, how much content am I getting. You need to just throw that metric out the window and instead be asking yourself the question of what is the effectiveness of this content? How much of this content am I actually going to use? How much of it is actually on point? And what is the likelihood that people are going to be able to consume it in our organization? Because the number one challenge that I hear with organizations that purchase things like LinkedIn Learning is that people just aren't using it enough. And there's going to be two elements to that. One, there's the practicality piece, like does the content actually match business needs and things that people want to learn? But then secondarily, is it likely that people can really fit this into their schedules? If a lesson is 45 minutes long, then no, they're not going to be able to fit into their schedule. And so when it comes to looking at off-the-shelf content, I really can't stress this enough. The number of hours that you are purchasing or number of minutes that you are purchasing and trying to drive that up is always going to be a losing proposition. So you should just throw that out and instead not necessarily look for the reverse. It doesn't necessarily mean that shorter is better. It's just that you need to be looking at the effectiveness, which is going to be a function of how long is it taking for people to consume this content, and the longer content probably often isn't going to be sometimes isn't going to be as effective. So that's the off the shelf stuff. So that then leads right into, okay, so if we're trying to make things smaller, well, the common term that people use these days is the term micro learning. And people ask, okay, well, what is micro learning? And I've actually been to conferences where they talk about this, and and everybody agrees that there is no definition. It's not that it has to be 1 minute or 5 minutes. It's not, can this be uploaded as a YouTube short or anything like that. It's just generally shorter content. And for me, 10 to 15 minutes is like at the high end of what I would consider micro learning. Probably the defining feature of what constitutes micro learning is that it focuses on just one thing. You're trying to get people to learn one definition, one skill. Like that's really what micro learning is about. And I think in today's world, those individual engagements need to keep getting generally shorter, but more importantly, more precise in what they're trying to achieve. Micro learning isn't about taking your hour-long course and condensing it into 15 minutes with all the same information in there. That's not what micro learning really is. What micro learning really is okay, I take this hour-long course, I decide there's 12 topics inside it, and I break it up and take each one of those topics on as individual chunks of information. That's what a real micro-learning strategy is. And I think it's really effective when we talk about learning in the flow of work, learning in the flow of anything, trying to nudge people towards a new behavior, then that is a really, really effective way to do it. So as the world keeps spinning up and attention spans keep going down, it's not that we need to necessarily play into that, but we need to be realistic and realize that when people sit down, if we can focus on just one thing and get to that takeaway as fast as possible, it's probably going to be more effective. But that then also asks the question of, I talked about targeting with micro learning. Well, but what about larger learning outcomes? If we're trying to, if we're shifting towards a focus on performance in our organization, we want learning that drives better organizational performance. How do those fit in? And I do think that in many ways, there's two opposing forces here, and they need to be going in two different directions. When it comes to the content length and specificity, that needs to be getting narrower and narrower. But what that means is that when it comes to larger organizational changes, I honestly think we need to be lengthening them out longer and longer. We keep having new manager training sessions where it's a half a day or it's a full day, and you're trying to teach people how to give feedback, how to set goals, how to do all kinds of stuff, and it's just not realistic. Like we need to be we need to chunk that out into focusing on specific things, but then let people focus on just that one thing for longer. For me, when I think about learning management and what management and leadership is really about in the corporate world, for me, it's really about three primary things. It's about being able to kind of manage time and resources. It's about the ability to set clear goals, and it's about the ability to give feedback. Three simple things. Now, I would focus on just one of those things for at least a month. If I'm talking about how to give one-on-one feedback, and if you really want to drive somebody's behavior change, you should be focusing on giving feedback over the course of like at least a month. And it shouldn't be until the end of that you're really expecting to see substantial changes. And I think that's another big mistake that people make when they are trying to evaluate their learning system. They're just not being realistic. If you're saying my current leadership development course isn't effective because people aren't taking anything away from it, replacing one half-day course with another half-day course probably isn't going to make a difference. Taking that half-day course and spreading it out over 6 months, where you're focusing on different behaviors at different points in time so that they can slowly change their behavior, that's going to be more effective. And so, I think these are two contrasting things of micro-learning, learning outcomes. On the one thing, the individual pieces of content need to be more precise and pared down to fit into our busy schedules, but that means we need to be lengthening the amount of time that we are willing to spend going after a particular learning or performance objective. So I think that's kind of the two competing forces there to go after. And then the fourth and final thing I wanted to talk about is say, okay, so we're going after smaller courses, we're going after longer content. What about those large cornerstone courses? Are those going away? Should we never do a half-day session or a weekend seminar again? I don't think so. I think when it comes to behavior change and performance improvement, we can't forget the fact that momentum is a really important thing. Think about yourself. Anytime you're trying to change yourself, momentum, feeling like you're moving forward, feeling like you're making accomplishments is a really important factor in how long you're going to be able to sustain that effort. And those longer courses, I really think can help you achieve that. And so that's where I think all of this stuff can be tied together to really have meaningful impact with our learning programs. Is day to day, the thing that people are most often interacting with is micro content. These smaller segmented things that are focusing on just one thing or reminding you about something that you knew, that you had already learned. You build that into a program that is taking place over a longer period of time, several weeks, a couple months, in order to give people time to absorb that information and try to change their behavior. But within that span of time, there is still room, and I would say it would be a good thing to have a couple key moments where you do still sit everybody down, bring everybody together, whether it's a kickoff event, a halfway through, there's a few different times you can say, okay, we're going to really try to get this moving, get that momentum. Because, it's just like, momentum is such a perfect way to think about it. If you have a bowling ball sitting on the ground and you're trying to move it and you're just kind of like sitting there poking at it, it's not going to move. You need to get it moving. And then once you put in that big effort to get it moving, well, now you can just kind of poke it to keep it moving. And that's often how I think about like the large cornerstone courses in combination with the micro learning to get the outcomes that you want over a longer period of time. I hope that helps break down a little bit some of the ways to think about course length, because it's just hard. It's hard to think about because even the word course has so many meanings, because different learning management systems call it different things. And so really what it is, rather than thinking of it in terms of like a specific course, you need to be thinking about it in terms of the content that is going to be driving the outcome. You have the larger outcome that is you're not going to achieve it from a single interaction. So from a single course, a single piece of content, you're not going to get any outcome, any meaningful outcome from one piece of content. And so you have your larger outcome, you have your bits of content along the way, and some of that content should be these big momentum builder events, whether it's a longer online course, an in-person event, a virtual event, whatever it is. I think that's the best way to think about all this stuff. So to sum all this up, when it comes to off-the-shelf content, course length, just kind of throw it out the window. It's gonna lead you in the wrong direction. You don't want to be thinking about the sheer amount of content that you are purchasing because it's not a meaningful metric when you are evaluating off-the-shelf stuff. The individual pieces of content generally should be getting shorter, but that doesn't mean just shorter in time, but smaller in what they are focusing on. Focus on one thing per piece of content. That's how you get an effective microlearning strategy. But the larger outcomes that you're trying to achieve, you should be lengthening the amount of time that you are willing to commit resources in order to achieve those outcomes. And while you are doing that, some points along the way, you should still be looking for those big cornerstone events that are really going to push people in the direction that you want them to go if you want an effective learning strategy. I hope that's helpful. Thank you once again for jumping on. If you like this, please like, subscribe, depending on whatever platform you are on, and I look forward to seeing you next time on The Practical Learning Professional. Thanks. Hey, are you new to learning or struggling keeping up with the learning needs of your organization? If you find yourself in that position, I want to help out. So down in the description of this video, there's a link to schedule time with me where we can chat about kind of the challenges that you're having and seeing if there's any way that Better Everyday Studios could help you take your learning organization to the next level. I'd really love to hear from you. Even if we never do business, I just love talking to learning people like you. So please go down to the description below and click on the link, set up some time with me. I'd really love to chat.